what are you trying to do by bringing Zizek into the clinic? Zizek, which is, again, this is an interesting curtailment at this point too, where Zizek took the clinic, so Lacanian psychoanalysis, to theory and politics and critical, so sociology and whatnot. But you're doing the opposite and bringing his philosophy back into the clinic. And
Yeah,
what is this
it's not what
going?
Lacan's trying to do. So it's like the problem is like ultimately the idea is what is the ideological critique? So you bring Zizek into the clinic to critique the intrinsic ideology present in modern psychology, right?
Perfect.
And all, yeah, so like this appears as an objective ontological system. Like, oh, do I have the ADHD? Do I have the anxiety? Why is this the category of life? I was like, go back to like, maybe go back to like, let's go back to 600 to 800 AD. Let's look at what the Jewish, Christian, and Islamic communities were drawing. They drew some people, and they mark the people, and they say this is your this, and like why don't we use that generic system versus, and there's an anthropological idea. I've only recently started studying with some better educated people in anthropology. Um, why don't we use ancient generics? So there's a concept of a generic, which is to say I draw a body, right? I draw a body and I attach a bunch of concepts to the body, and I say people basically have this kind of system, and that's a person. And if you're doing, and religions can do this. Oh, here you're doing this, and that's what a person consists of. So, in a Hegelian sense, what and a ideological critique, we're taking kind of psychology's diagnostic system as a generic. It has kind of the appearance of medicine, but it's not. It's not the same thing. I mean, if people hallucinate, you might say, well, what about people who hallucinate? It's like, yeah, there are people who hallucinate and that's kind of rare. And so there's schizoaffective disorder, schizophrenia, delusional disorder, right? And this kind of thing. Um, but another way to say is they hallucinate. They take a pill and it drops their dopamine and they stop hallucinating. Like, at what point do you need the generic? Um, I think it's less kind of solid than people make it out to be. And people know this. All the professionals know this and they say this. They say, well, this is broadly helping us figure out some psychological treatment models. So like, you want to like focus on this or that. But ultimately, I would argue like psychology has the capacity to have you relate to your unmediated or pre-mediated intuition or your psyche or your subjectivity. And ultimately, this is more universal, which is to say, bringing your rational capacity in conversation with not just your most impulsive self, but there's a even more impulsive self than your most impulsive self, and that is your dream self. When you dream, you're creating a deep world of concepts, condensed, synthesized, right? This is that word. Really, it really is synthesized. It's not dialectically split, but it's really, you could say, premediated synthesis of being, right? So this is more impulsive than your most impulsive kind of self. And ultimately, how do you bring your essentializing process and development of your decision making in conversation with this, and some basic kind of categories of life, which are like interpersonal relationships, telos, cause, right? And this kind of thing. So
Yeah,
that's kind of what I'm trying to develop as like, when people get this, they go to therapy and they get this. First of all this stuff can match up quite easily, which is to say like, oh yeah, I have this symptom and it reduce. Like you can, that's all still there. Like we don't have to throw that away. Like we can still do symptom reduction and so on. But there's a kind of like qualitative potential about how to do this, which ultimately is not expressible by insurance or even kind of medical speak. It needs philosophy, right? We have to talk philosophically in order to, you could say, deliver the highest quality psychology, which is to say thinking and feeling itself and being it's and acting,
Yeah, I
right?
love that. I love that, Elliot. I mean, this is, in fact, that last bit you just mentioned, that deeply resonates with me. And it's funny you say I spoke to a psychoanalyst. She's a psychotherapist, but also psychoanalyst, based in Perth in Australia. And she essentially made the same point. She said like she doesn't really even engage much in theory like the way you do. She's very much, sticks to like on Freud, the praxis than the theory. And the whole point was, yeah, a lot of the people that come to her, they come as a sort of a last resort where, yeah, they know they've got some anxiety, or they know they've got this or that, but they're like, yeah, I know it, but I'm still doing it. I'm still abusing alcohol, or I'm addicted to pornography or sex. So I'm still I'm still suffering as an individual, even though I've put myself into this category. I'm like, okay, I've got ADHD, but that doesn't really help anything. There's no cure in that sense. And
Right.
then they come into psychoanalysis and go through that process, and sometimes it takes years.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at least psychoanalysis is making the space for this. Like it's like psychoanalysis laid the foundation to like let people free associate, to interpret dreams and things like this. I'm not sure if she does interpreting dreams. Maybe she does if she's doing psychoanalysis.
Yeah, I'm not
Right.
sure. I mean, I haven't spoken to her in about a year, so, but she wrote a beautiful essay on love, which I kind of want to talk to you about too, because you do mention friendship in this book. However,
Right.
just on this, Elliot, and I think this is more for the listener, so I hope you're not gonna like cringe inside. I'm just gonna read out this excerpt from your book, from just on
All
page
right.
one itself, from Jacques in the Clinic, because I think this little excerpt does capture the spirit of the book. You say the new vanishing point is this: a psychoeducated person with high insight into their own functioning, with an algorithmic response process with which to respond to events on an individual, microscopic, as well as a systemic level. And
Yeah. So
yeah, please elaborate on that statement. Yeah.
so aesthetically, I would say maybe that's not the best way to put it, but but nonetheless, it's like it's once you say algorithmic, like this kind of thing, what it means like is like how do you respond and how do you kind of understand yourself? When I was writing that, I was thinking about this intuition level a lot, or Zizek in the Clinic, this kind of first moment, right? Which is to say, what is psychotherapy doing? It's kind of working directly on this first moment. So before I kind of in ego and the hyperstate described, well, what is in that first moment? This is like, well, you're you're being informed, you're getting psychoeducation, you're changing your relationship to your intuition reflexes in this first moment. Um, so the algorithmic, when you say algorithmic, aesthetically, this is like me in my 20s and so on. But like, um, that what that really means is your intuitive reflex in terms of this intuitive reflexive first moment, right? It will change. Like I would even say, like it all the way to like ultimately, if you really, it'll change your dreams, right? Like all the way down, like to say like this process of psychotherapy as you're speaking and as you're kind of doing things with people and as you're rationally kind of understanding, it will change your unconscious. So like I feel like that's also so that's true, that's kind of fun, algorithmic, but let's just say because this process has the capacity to introduce your rationality to your kind of most impulsive self or your psyche, like ultimately your education is getting in there in terms of understanding is getting in. This is why psychology is totalitarian. Um, because it really goes to like the core of your thought in understanding. But I'm trying to say, like, people have, once you're there, you do have the freedom, ideally, to develop the concepts that you are already developing. But let's say like someone comes in and they're like a crypto libertarian, and they say like, not like a secret libertarian, but like a crypto bro, like libertarian, crypto libertarian. Um, and they're like, well, Elliot, like I'm really trying to make it in crypto currency, and this is kind of what's happening, and this is the fluctuations, and these are the difficulties, and might start talking about it. Well, how is this working for you? It's like, yeah, it's tough for me. It's maybe it's not working for me. Maybe it is working for me. I'm certainly like, in this process of this, and it might even, psychoeducation might say something like, there's a couple ways to look at this. There's like the addictive property of technology itself and gambling. Then there's the cutting edge kind of future in terms of like, this is cryptocurrency, could be a new digital currency. There's all this kind of stuff. So, and maybe you can tell me more about why you're in cryptocurrency. And there's a moment where it'll be like, well, I really believe in it, or like, I don't fucking know why I'm in it, actually, or like this kind of. So there is like this measuring, and you kind of have to bring in arguments for and against, and ultimately your concepts are somewhat ideological, but the idea is like, you're trying to do this with the most kind of freedom, existential freedom for the person to kind of work through it themselves. And sometimes they'll fall and make a change. Other times they maybe will reinforce. Or for instance, like people that are very organized at work, like extremely organized, and they're having some trouble because they're so obsessed with organization.
That's
Maybe
me.
they're
That's
OC.
me. Yeah, that's
That's
me.
you.
Yeah.
Maybe they're OCD. Maybe they're this kind of thing, right? So this is like one way to think of it. Um, but it's like, would their treatment consist of like saying, you're thinking about these things, but really you shouldn't. So this is like an ideological, which is to say like, this is a symptom. Maybe you should get rid of this. Or actually, there's some positives to being organized,
Yeah,
right?
I was just gonna mention that. I'm glad you brought that up because for me, I know I maybe they'd call me OCD, but I never really cared about that. I was like, yeah, I'm OCD because for me, it's at a very practical level. I realized that being OCD makes my life better. Like as in it in the sense that what I find is I'd suffer more if I was, in complete chaos and just not organized and shabby and like I'm
Yeah.
nonchalant about things. And at least for me, subjectively, I kind of I guess I've embraced the symptom,
Well,
maybe
so
the wrong
like,
to do, I don't know, but yeah.
wouldn't it be weird for me, who just was like, oh shit, I got an interview, to be like, then come into a therapy session with you and then say, you're too organized. Like, this is what psychology has the potential to do, right? Rather than kind of put it into the process of the actual, which is to say like, how is this working in your life? What are the stressors, right? How is this not work? So it's back to self-interest. Like, is can I ask you, Rahul, just not to therapize you, but just one question,
Good,
which
bro.
is like,
Go
are
for it.
there any downsides to being really organized?
Yes, I think I don't deal well with uncertainty. But then the way I deal with uncertainty or like the stress from uncertainty is through like physical pursuits. Like, I mean, if I'm stressed, I'll go like run a marathon or something on the day just by myself. And I find
Right.
that physical relief, that I don't know what you would call it, that helps me deal with that. But I'd say that's one. And the other probably would be, yeah, I can be like a bit of an annoying partner or like an annoying friend because I won't think I'm like a fascist. Everything's in point, order, time, discipline.
Right.
So I think those two. If
So those are two specific. So you have yourself stated the downsides versus me picking them from a symptom list. So you said the downsides are, uncertainty is difficult, and on an interpersonal level, I want to control other people's actions and it causes conflict,
Sometimes.
right? Sometimes. So, I mean, these are things that can be worked concretely through a process. And you see how that's very different than saying you have OCD, here's some benzos or something.
Mhm. And that's
Like,
where it goes back to the
yeah,
idea of in psychoanalysis, free association. There's a fundamental dignity to that, isn't it? You say you're
yeah.
a human being, you respect the human being for who they are, and there's a dignity that you can work through this. Yeah, I